Alright guys, so in today's video we're going to be going over more information about The Last of Us Part 2. Apparently Neil Druckmann talked a little bit about a new enemy type that we talked about briefly in a past video, but we really didn't go into too much detail about this new enemy type, and it's called a Shambler. And apparently they will be prevalent throughout your playthrough of The Last of Us Part 2, and so Neil Druckmann wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about this new enemy and go over why exactly it exists within the actual lore, and let you know that they're not just throwing it in there for the sake of throwing it in there, but they really believe that with this specific enemy type, it's going to really up the intensity of certain combat situations and combat encounters, which sounds really awesome. But we're also going to take a minute to talk about an update we got apparently on the sales figures for The Last of Us 1, which is always very interesting, and we all know just how impressive those sales figures are. Not just for The Last of Us, but also for a lot of Sony's first-party games. They seem to sell very well, and they seem to continue to show that single-player gaming is alive and thriving. But it says here that The Last of Us Part 2 director Neil Druckmann has said that the upcoming game's new enemy type, the Shamblers, haven't been added on a whim, and that their inclusion will make sense in the lore's context. In the first game, there's all this documentation about the different stages of the infection, Druckmann told the PlayStation blog. Now we have a way to justify why they are in these different stages. Why are there mutations of these things? Without getting into it here, there is something about the environment and how much time has passed that has allowed these mutations to occur. So I actually think this is really interesting. He's pretty much letting us know that when we play The Last of Us Part 2, we're going to expect to have these explanations. Like, things are not just going to be different for the sake of being different. There's going to be actual reasons behind it. This is the level of detail that fans really appreciate with a lot of Naughty Dog's games, and especially with a game like The Last of Us, where it's this crazy infection. Things are just, happening to humanity, and I think one of the layers of immersion that is really important is being able to explain and being able to have reasoning behind what's going on and what you're seeing and what you're encountering in the game. Of course, not everybody's going to care about that, but for the ones who really like to get into the lore, into the story, and to understand, why these Shamblers exist, it's really nice to know that they're taking these things into account, and they're not just going to, we know that Naughty Dog is a studio. They're not the type of studio that's just going to throw things out there and just say, look at this, it's here for no reason, so that's really nice. But it goes on to say, Druckmann went on to explain how the Shamblers will make combat encounters more intense. We have runners that close the distance quickly, he continued. We have clickers that move slowly but are one-hit kills. Shamblers provide this area of attack where they have this cloud of gaseous acid that burns materials around it. It burns your skin. The way you saw it in the demo is that they're mostly on their own. It gets really interesting because you have a cloud that hurts you when you enter it, but it also blocks your view. Then runners burst through it, so the combination gets really interesting. So he's talking about exactly how these Shamblers apparently are going to make the combat encounters just that much more intense, which honestly, it's something I'm going to be really interested to see exactly how much more intense they end up making the combat encounters, because if there's one thing that The Last of Us did, I think better than pretty much most other games, if I'm being honest, is just how they made combat scenarios truly have this level of intensity and brutality to them and tension that when you think about what makes The Last of Us almost like a near perfect game, if not a perfect game, it's not just the story beats, but it's the fact that throughout the actual game itself, as you're playing it, part of the pacing is knowing, Naughty Dog, that is, them knowing how to keep the tension up and when to dial it back. And they found this perfect way to pace it. But, because we have already experienced The Last of Us 1, and we kind of went through that, and we know how high the tension can get within that first game, it's going to be interesting to see, not just with the Shamblers, but with other enemy types as well, and knowing that the AI is going to be greatly improved, to see just how much higher they can get this tension and just how much more intense these encounters can be. Frankly, when it comes to playing The Last of Us Part 2, this is the area that I mean, obviously I'm most excited about the story, but I'm going to be just so interested to see how the gameplay leaves me feeling, because I know it's going to be good, right? Like, we all know it's going to be good, but I'm just wondering, is it, when we think about this game being next level good every time we talk about it, I'm really excited to see how it's going to leave me feeling after I play my first couple of hours and I have my first combat encounters, because man, I'm expecting something awesome, intense and special, and I can't wait for it. But moving on from that, we're actually going to talk about The Last of Us 1 and go over how many millions of copies it sold between PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. So it says that Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2 is perhaps one of the biggest releases of the past few years. However, the game continues to be a huge success for Sony, according to Nico Partners senior analyst Daniel Mott on Twitter, which apparently this guy blocked me on Twitter for some reason. I literally never spoke to this individual, never said a word to them, never tweeted at them, nothing. In fact, the only thing I've ever done is link his Twitter account on my channel, which in regards to good news and interesting information, to give him more followers. But I guess apparently he decided to block me. Don't know what that's about. I guess that's Twitter though, right? Like, that's just what people do. But because I probably could have gotten this information out to you guys sooner, but I can't see his Twitter, so I have to kind of get it through these news articles from other outlets talking about it. Anyway, going on here, it says that according to Nico Partners senior analyst Daniel Mott on Twitter, The Last of Us has sold over 20 million copies on PS4 and PS3. It was last reported to have sold 17 million copies as of June 2018. The Last of Us launched for the PlayStation 3 in 2013 and stuck out for its storytelling and graphical prowess. It would be re-released on the PS4 as The Last of Us Remastered and see several visual improvements along with the base game. There was also the Left Behind DLC, which could be played standalone. It says The Last of Us Part 2 releases on February 21st, 2020 for PS4, along with it being about 50% bigger than the previous game. So, yeah, apparently it's also worth noting here that looking at the tweet that they have a screenshot of it here. It says that Uncharted 2 has sold over 6 million copies on PS3 prior to the release of the Uncharted collection on PS4. So that's also an interesting tidbit of information. But man, that is insanely impressive to think that The Last of Us has went on to sell over 20 million copies between two platforms, that being the PS3 and the PS4, it's an impressive feat, honestly. You really don't see many games hitting numbers like that, and it really gets me excited to see just how well The Last of Us Part 2 is going to do. We did talk about this a little bit in a previous video where we found out that from somebody who has this information. They couldn't give us hard data, of course. Nobody ever can, except in cases like this, rare cases like this. But apparently The Last of Us Part 2 is on track to basically break all of PlayStation's previous records. And I've predicted that I forget how many exactly I said could sell within the first 3 days, 3.5 million. But I think they could actually end up doing 4 million within the first 3 days of The Last of Us Part 2 going on sale. I've seen some people say that they think it could go 5 million or beyond, which honestly, I mean, it's possible. It is possible, man. I mean, the hype for this game, it is truly just on another level. And it's to a point where there's not many games where you really pay this close attention to all the little tidbits of information you get. But I've been paying I can't help but find myself paying really, really close attention to everything that Naughty Dog has to say about this game, because I don't know, it's just that exciting. There's just so much that they're doing with this. We know how much time they've taken on this game. We know just how much effort and how much care is going into the sequel to ensure that it is pretty much going to be the best game that launches this generation. I mean, there's people who are excited for Final Fantasy VII Remake, and totally understandable. There's people who are excited for Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm excited for these games as well. But for me personally, I just get this feeling that there's going to be something truly special about The Last of Us Part 2. I think that it's easily going to win Game of the Year 2020, and I don't say that in like a cocky way or anything like that. I'm just saying I think that Naughty Dog is going to just blow people away, and it's really nice to hear that The Last of Us is still reaching these milestones even all these years later, hitting 20 million sold. Very impressive. Good news for single-player games. Good news for high-quality games, right? And it's also exciting to hear Neil Druckmann talk about how apparently the combat And The Last of Us Part 2 is going to be just that much more intense because of this new enemy type they added, and they really think that it's going to provide just a something we haven't experienced yet. So that does it for the video, guys. Let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. Be sure to leave it a like if you did enjoy it. It really helps it out, lets me know you guys are enjoying the content. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.